Oh, hi there. So, what I'm doing here is, oh, I'm responding to a couple of videos. Mainly, I'm responding to one by this YouTube character who calls himself Big Joel. And, he did a video a few days ago titled God is Weird, a close look at Adam and Eve. Mainly, that's what I'm responding to here. And normally, if I have anything to say about these videos, I'll just go in their comment section and make a comment. But what fun is that when I can sit here and make a video and use an excuse to post up some of this useless, spurious video of me doing undermining for the liberal power, which is something I had to do last weekend to maintain my rank. I thought I'd dust off the Instupidable and kill a few robot spaceships. Hopefully that helps them out a little bit, but it's something I had to do to, keep my hand in the game, I guess. Anyway, I'm not criticizing Big Joel. He does really interesting videos, and you should watch him. What I had here was basically an answer to the question he's asking in his video, which basically had to do with he wants to know what the book of Genesis is really all about. What is that story with the apple all about, really? And well, lucky for him, that's something I've actually thought about, and I have an opinion about it. And what the heck, I'm as ignorant as anybody, so I feel like I'm qualified to talk. And basically, what I posted on his comment board already, and what I'm basically going to rehash for you here, is something along the following. Now, first of all, religion exists because it has collective social utility, right? It enables the creation and maintenance of social hierarchies of authority. This allows relatively stable families, communities, cities, civilizations to exist despite the natural tendency of intelligent apes, that means us in other words, to self-organize into small amorphous groups and slaughter each other at every chance they get. This is something a lot of apes do, and it's something we do, left to ourselves. Religion accomplishes this by leveraging our intelligence. We use our intelligence to create a narrative that on balance, in general, we as individuals are able to accept as a justification for the established order and our own respective places in it. It does the same thing as political ideology, is what I'm saying. Now, religion is more primal than political ideology. It's far older. It goes back a long way. So anyway, what's the garden story all about? It's about the fact that concepts like good and evil are subjective. They're obviously subjective. They're inherently subjective. They're not in any way the products of rational cognition. I'm pretty sure they predate by a lot the evolution of our intelligence. People have always had this sense of things being good or evil. Now, in some cultures, they don't talk about good and evil as what I've heard. They may talk about harmony and disharmony or other things. I'm not an expert on these things. That's what I've heard. But in general, I feel like although they may not call it that, there probably is at some point a dichotomy of things that they'd like to have around and things that they'd rather not have around. And you can call it good and evil if you want. In our society anyway, in our culture, good and evil is ubiquitous. Everybody knows what you're talking about when you talk about good and evil. Anyway. So yeah, they predate intelligence, I think. There's always been good and evil, even before we developed a lot of the intelligence we have now. That's my opinion, of course. And at the same time, they obviously have this enormous power to influence our minds and our actions. So if you're going to create social harmony and get people used to living in your social structure, these forces have to be accounted for in your narrative. Any religion or ideology you want to create to support the social order has to take these into account, and the order has to be justified in terms of them, good and evil. But how do you do that when they're, again, so obviously subjective and instinctive? That is, you know, what's good for one guy is terrible for the next guy, and they may come to blows over it if they don't let up about it. Anyway, that's where stories like this come in. The solution is simply to say, well, there's this guy. We call him God. He decides what perfect, objective, good and evil really, really is. And that's it. God's point of view about this is never justified. It obviously can't be justified. There's no way to do that. You're just given the blank, flat proposition, unsupported proposition that all this is okay because he's just God. And more to the point, he's not one of us. He's not the king, for example. The king is just following God's orders on this. This is what the story says. And when good and evil can't be logically nailed down, in other words, somewhere out there in metaphysical space, we require this absolute point of reference, God, in order to convince the people in general that yes, by God, literally, there really is this objective good and evil out there, even though nobody around here can reliably tell you what it is, without being gainsaid by some other unruly fool. We just imagine that it's out there somewhere in God's brain, and that's good enough for the purposes of religion and political ideology. Because all you're here to do is to back up and support the social order. It doesn't matter that you can't logically support this proposition that God knows what good and evil really is. It doesn't matter. It's enough that you can put the story out there and that people accept it, and that thereby you support the social order. That's what I'm saying. So anyway, the garden. Why can't they eat the apple? Well, it's because once these characters know about good and evil, they then become capable of making judgments about these things. And it therefore becomes possible for them to question God about these things, this being the ultimate bad thing to do. If they didn't know about good and evil, then they'd simply necessarily have to go along with whatever God says about these things, and everything would be good. Anyway, worse than that in practical terms is that once they know about good and evil, they inevitably, unavoidably, because good and evil are, of course, subjective, they're going to start disagreeing with each other about this stuff. And this is going to lead, inevitably, to social chaos, violence, war, and all the rest of it. Okay, so you see the significance of the apple and of knowing of good and evil. This is the explanation given for why there's so much chaos and conflict in the world. It's because we wrongfully have this ability to know good and evil, and therefore we can't just take God's word for it. We have to make an effort to take God's word for it. This is what that's about. Now, of course, this story, there's no way that you can take this story and make logical sense of it. It is at bottom simply the ultimate appeal to an unquestionable and even an undefinable authority. You know, there's nothing logical about that. It's just a blank statement, and the trick is just to get people to accept it. All right, but you know, despite that, this is what's required on a very practical level. How else can you get a bunch of largely ignorant human beings to cooperate on the building of your ziggurat, your pyramid, your citadel, your grand royal palace, or your modern shopping center? You know, there has to be this narrative. There has to be this story. How do you get civilization maintained on a long-term basis without this kind of without this kind of story being out there for people to believe in and keep themselves in line. As far as I know, it's a question. Nobody's found another way to do it, really. That's why we still have religion today. That's what it's for. And that's what this story is about. The question of how to maintain society in any way other than that, it's an open question to this day, and there's still no real good answer to it. So anyway, that's what I had to say about Joel there. And that was my explanation of the apple in the Garden of Eden, such as it is. Aside from that, then you have this other guy on YouTube called Isaac Arthur, who's also a great YouTuber, and he makes really good videos that you should watch. And he's way too optimistic in my opinion, I think. But I can't argue with him because he obviously knows way more than me about physics and engineering and pretty much everything else, I'm sure. But this time he made a video called Government Types of the Future, which at first glance, before I actually watched it, I thought he was going to do some speculating about, well, he does do some speculating about governments in the future, but I don't feel like he covered a lot of new ground in that one. Basically what he was doing is he points out that there's just a huge zoo of ideologies out there, which there is, yeah. And he goes through a lot of the kinds of supposed futuristic government types that you're likely to find in science fiction stories, including, the interstellar, the futuristic neo-feudalism, like you find in Dune, things like that. And he talks a little bit about how AI and neural links could influence the creation of new types of government. But I didn't really feel like there was anything new coming out of that. What I would point out there, again from my unassailable position of ignorance, is that I have some thoughts about government in general. They're related a little bit to what I said with reference to Joel's video. I mentioned earlier that the religious narrative and political ideology, they're serving similar purposes, which is to maintain this, support and maintain the social order. That's what political ideology is about. It's about justifying the social order so that you accept that the guy in charge ought to be in charge and that you should take his orders and you're not going to try to overthrow him or anything like that. That's what political ideology is for. Anyway, I mentioned a little earlier how a lot of the things involved in these stories predate intelligence. We were worrying about things being good and evil long before we became as intelligent as we are now. We were very much concerned with politics in terms of, the pecking order long before we became intelligent at all. Even animals have politics in those terms. Chimpanzees will organize into little groups. They have politics in that sense. And we do too. We still have that to this day. And what I would contend is that the politics we have today, these ideologies and things, at their core, at their heart, at the bottom of all these systems, they're really all just the same thing. They're essentially that pack mentality. You take a bunch of humans, you put them on a desert island, they're going to self-organize in this primitive way. And given enough time, maybe they'll come up with some fancy words and a nice piece of paper with some high-flown ideals on it, but at the bottom, at the core of it, what they're still doing is they're still doing that pack dominance and submissions deal. That's what they're doing. It's all the same. It's animal behavior with some fancy words on top of it. When you talk about all these different isms out there, I think the differences between them are to some extent superficial. Okay. They all claim to believe in various different things, but at the bottom, what they're really doing is they're setting up an order. The main benefits that human politics gets from human intelligence is that human intelligence and ingenuity is what enables our pack organizations to get as big as they are. We can have national states now, and this is thanks to telecommunications, and it's thanks to the educational system and to printed books and things like that, and to the spoken language, which allows us to project our charisma out and create these allegiances amongst larger groups of people over wider areas. But underneath of all that is the same thing going on. This is animal behavior, and this is also the problem with human politics, and it's the problem when you start talking about future human governments. How can future human governments be any different from this? All they can do is, again, they have to be built on this same animal behavior, this same tendency of human beings to bunch up into little groups and have leaders and followers, just like chimpanzees, just like chickens for that matter. Governments of the future, they can't if they don't do something beyond that, then they're really just variations on what's gone on before. There may be new technology that will allow you to make the organizations perhaps bigger, perhaps they'll last a little bit longer, but at the bottom they're still going to be the same thing, and they're going to be heir to the same kinds of problems, which is to say the problems like instability. I would say that human governments are inherently unstable over the long period. They're not really under the control of any group or individual for any reliable length of time. They're really, on the whole, they're emergent phenomena. They're just the sum total of what all the individuals involved are doing. It's just not possible if you build a government in the traditional way that we've always done it to do anything more than that. You have to. I have trouble with this response to Isaac because I'm still not really sure where I'm going with this. I've been thinking about this kind of thing for a while, and basically what I'm trying to say is that there's nothing new in the future for government. Okay, not that I would call it. What I would call it new would be some kind of really more fundamental understanding of what politics is in order to really revolutionize it, and there's no prospect of that. You can't get around the fact that human beings have to organize in this way. All right, and there's no real innovation to be done with it unless you can unless you can fully understand human psychology, which means understanding the human brain in full, and we're nowhere near that. I mean, the human brain is just a cipher, Nobody understands it. That Elon Musk neural net that he had the video about the other day, it's a joke. I'm sure it's of some academic value in terms of him making improvements to the technology, but he's up there talking about like he thinks this is going to be some kind of commercial product where you're going to walk in somewhere and get this thing put in your head, and then you're going to be listening to your Walkman in your brain or something, or searching Google just by thinking about it. It's not happening. It's not happening. No, there is no way at this point that we're anywhere near the point of doing anything like that. And if you're not doing that, then really, then you're just doing experiments on pigs and making beeping noises. That's it, It's nice that he can read the muscle movements of the pigs and all that. That's nice, But it's not something that anybody with a working brain is going to want to have his skull drilled open to have it put in there. I don't think so. It's not of any really great use. Not the way a real neural net like the ones you see in science fiction stories. It's not useful in that way. Yeah, Isaac does touch on things like that a little bit in his video, and he's right that if you had things like that, or real AI, these could probably make a real difference in terms of human government. But those are all not real possibilities at this point. And I think at this point, if you want to talk about governments of the future, it would be more useful in the more immediate sense to talk about understanding government the way it actually works as opposed to the way it presents itself. You know, you get the fancy words on paper, you get these. You get the Constitution, you get the Communist Manifesto, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. All the fancy words mean nothing because at the bottom of it, you're still going to have a bunch of rulers and a bunch of people that are taking orders, and it's dominance and submission, and that's all it is. And they're going to do things. And they're going to do things that are completely in conflict with the ideals that they supposedly hold. In our own history in the United States, we live more or less by the same set of high-flown words that we had when we started this country a couple hundred years ago. And for most of that time, the people running around in this country were very happily going around, you know, killing Indians, enslaving blacks, doing all kinds of things like that. And seeing and never ever seeing any conflict between what they were doing and the high-flown ideals that they swore they were living by. You know, it's the same thing. We don't have so much of that today, but then I would argue that that's only because we're more prosperous today. And prosperous people, they tend to have the luxury of putting their minds to higher things and pretending they really believe in them. And as long as they have some money, they don't have to feel like they have to get so bloodthirsty and mercenary about keeping themselves together. And then they can pretend they're better than that, you know. But the fact of the matter is, you let times go a little bit harder, and you let people have to struggle to survive a little bit more, and they'll go right back to the same thing. Nothing's really changed. All that's changed is that we're a little better off than we were at the past. And that itself may be a passing fad. We'll see. You know, I'm not as optimistic as Isaac. I don't think the future necessarily looks as bright as he does. You know, I mean, I hope he's right. But I think it's probably just as likely we're going to see a return of the bad old days at some point. Hopefully not in my lifetime, but you know, it does seem likely that could happen. Of course, I can't really read the future. I don't know the future any more than anybody else does. But you know, if you've read any science fiction, you know that science fiction in general doesn't necessarily talk about the future being better. It's just as likely to talk about the future being a lot worse. That's just the way it is. So future government, Isaac Arthur, well, you know, I don't really have a criticism of him. He makes great videos. You should watch his videos. I just don't have as rosy a picture of the future as he generally tends to have. He looks on the bright side all the time, and I don't. You know, I don't feel that hopeful about things. I guess if I was as well versed in physics and engineering as he was, maybe I would be more optimistic. But you know, I just deal with what I can see, and that's what I see going on. Anyway, other than that, I ain't got no reason to make this video. I just wanted pretty much just one excuse to throw up these spurious images of me blowing up these robots while I do my bit for the what is it, Felicia Winters, Liberal Power, and Elite Dangerous. I'm here undermining whatever system it is that they ordered me to go undermine. I'm still mining the low temperature diamonds by navigating around in the ring systems the way I figured out how to do. It works pretty well. I'm getting about, I don't know. I'm probably, with overhead and everything else, I'm probably getting about 150 tons an hour. Maybe a little bit more. I could probably do better than that if I was mining in a clipper, you know, with a 300-ton hold, because that way the same amount of overhead would net me a bigger amount of cargo in the end. But, you know, I like mining in the Python. That's perfectly fine for me. I don't need to. I'm not out here to make the most money I possibly can. I'm making plenty for me. You know, that's all I care about. I guess the only other thing I could mention is I've been watching a lot of videos about these sandbox space games, like what's the one? Dual Universe, and the other one is EVO. Yeah, I actually bought EVO. It's a nice looking game. It's built on the Unity engine. It kind of reminds me of Zarahip or Terahip. Which is a lot of fun, but that's not. But Zerahypt or Terahypt or whatever he's calling it now, it's not really a game. It's just him knocking out models and landscapes and shit for you to wander around in. EVO looks like it has some potential. It looks like a fun game. And I like it because it's not subscription-based like Unity is. The major problem I have with these games in general is that I don't have time to play them. I mean, I have a full-time job already. I have a full-time job where I'm getting shitloads of overtime dumped on me at the moment. At the moment, I'm working 55 or 60 hours a week. I'm working 6 days a week a lot of time. I get like 1 day off a week quite often. I don't have time. I don't have time to spend all day on games like this where you're crafting content, building spaceships. I barely have time to do anything other than work, sleep, and get back up and go back to work again, I bought EVO, but I haven't really touched it yet. I got into it enough to realize that the menus for customizing the keys are basically broken. They don't work at all. There's an INI file for key customization, and at some point, when I have a chance to play with this game, I'm going to have to get into there and set up the keys the way I want them. It supports a joystick, but there's basically no real way to configure it with the menus in the game. I'm hoping I can do it with the INI file, I think. And Dual Universe, yeah, it's real slick and it looks good. There's no way in hell I'm paying for that. That's subscription based, and I'm not going to plunk down 20 or 40 or 80 bucks and then have it sit on my hard drive and me having absolutely no time to even play it. No, that's not going to happen. Although it looks like a very nice game. Anyway, so I'm going to cut this short. That's all I got to say. This is just me wanting to mouth off to what is it, Big Joel and Isaac Arthur. I'm going to leave links to their stuff in here. They're both good. They're both good posters. They make real interesting stuff on YouTube, and you should watch them. Okay, well, that's all I got to say. Have a good evening.